There are truths so ancient, so encoded into the fabric of human consciousness, that they do not whisper, they thunder in silence. And yet, the world forgets. Not because it cannot remember, but because remembering would mean the end of everything familiar. The edges of our reality, like parchment too long exposed to time, curl under the heat of unspoken knowing. Somewhere, in that curling, lies a trail, almost erased, leading from the deserts of Egypt to the parables of Jesus, from golden temples to invisible bodies of light that orbit within the human form. This is not a story of religion, nor of doctrine. It is the unraveling of a secret so immense, it shatters the illusion of separation, of limitation, of death. The ancient Egyptians were not obsessed with death as modern minds so often misunderstand. They were connoisseurs of life, but not merely of the physical shell. They understood man as a constellation of energy layers, subtle realms woven into a greater whole. These 7 bodies, energetic, etheric, emotional, mental, causal, spiritual, and divine, were not poetic inventions, but blueprints of a complete human, a divine architecture meant to be activated, aligned, and transcended. But this knowledge, precise and breathtaking in its implications, did not vanish with the fall of dynasties. It was carried forward, fragmented and encoded, and resurfaced, cloaked in metaphor, in the teachings of the one called Jesus. Jesus was not merely a figure in history. He was a prism, a fractal of divine light refracted into a world asleep at the wheel of materialism. His words, though wrapped in the language of parables, mirrored the inner geometry of the same mysteries the Egyptian priesthood once guarded. "The kingdom of heaven," he said, "is within you." But what does that truly mean, beyond the comforting quote? It means that the same temple that stood in golden sand, the same sarcophagus that cradled transformation, is built into your being. His message was not about worshiping the external, but remembering the internal technology, those 7 luminous bodies, which, when harmonized, render a human being divine in both form and function. Yet, something happened. Somewhere between the Nile and the cross, the connection was severed, intentionally. The unifying thread between Christ consciousness and Egyptian mysticism was buried under layers of dogma, colonial conquest, and political repurposing. And so, humanity forgot. We began to believe we are flesh, thought, emotion, and nothing more. We forgot that the burning bush Moses saw was not just on the mountain, but also in his spine. We forgot that the resurrection of Christ was not merely an event in time, but a symbol for the ignition of the divine light body, the true awakening of man. To uncover this erased connection is not to cherry-pick symbols across epochs, but to open one's inner eye to the deeper architecture of reality. It is to see that the pyramids were not tombs, but codices, that the cross was not just wood, but a map of energetic ascent, that the 7 seals mentioned in Revelation are not apocalyptic devices, but references to the 7 centers of power within the human temple, that the Ankh and the crucifix, the Eye of Horus and the pineal gland, the resurrection and the light body, are all notes from the same symphony, scattered, but not lost. We stand at the edge of remembering, not through faith alone, but through gnosis, direct inner knowing. This journey is not academic, though it will reveal secrets that no textbook ever dares print. It is a return to wholeness, a gathering of the scattered bones of our spiritual anatomy and the breath that animates them. Jesus, Egypt, and the 7 bodies of man form a triad, a hidden trinity of transformation, erased by those who sought to rule minds rather than liberate souls. This exploration is for the seekers who feel something is missing in the noise of modernity, for the ones who've glimpsed in dreams a brighter self, or felt a pull they couldn't name while watching the sun set over the ocean. This is for those who suspect the veil is thin, and that perhaps, just perhaps, they've lived many lives under many suns. And so we begin, not to learn something new, but to remember something old, something buried not in the sand, but in your cells. Beneath the surface of history lies a current, a golden thread winding silently through the heart of every mystery school, sacred scripture, and esoteric glyph. It is not linear. It spirals. It speaks in symbols and resonance. And when we listen not just with the mind, but with the soul's deeper senses, the scattered echoes begin to harmonize. The teachings of Jesus, the wisdom of Egypt, the invisible anatomy of the human being. At first glance, they seem disparate, separated by millennia and culture. But when we strip away the filters of time and control, we see that they are telling the same story, the story of the soul's descent into form and its sacred ascent back into light. To grasp the unity of these teachings, we must first shift our perception of what it means to be human. We have been conditioned to see ourselves as mere bodies, vessels of blood and bone, temporarily animated by a mystery we do not dare to explore too deeply. But in truth, you are not a body. You have a body. In fact, you have 7. 7 concentric fields of consciousness, interwoven like Russian nesting dolls, each vibrating at a different octave of reality. These are not philosophical musings or New Age conjectures. They are the unspoken frameworks behind both the Egyptian path of ascension and the mystical teachings encoded within the words of Jesus. The ancient Egyptians described these aspects in detail. The Khat, physical body; the Ka, vital force; the Ba, soul; the Ib, heart consciousness; the Shut, shadow or unconscious self; the Sekhem, power or spiritual energy; and the Akh, immortal light body. Each layer was not merely symbolic, but initiatory, a station on the soul's pilgrimage back to Source. The journey through the 7 was a sacred science, a curriculum of self-mastery encoded in rituals, architecture, and cosmology. Now, look to Jesus, not as a passive figure of forgiveness, but as a master initiator. His teachings, when heard beyond dogma, echo the same architecture. The idea of the temple being within, the purification of the heart, the resurrection not as a singular event, but as a process of transfiguration. The transfiguration on Mount Tabor, where his face shone like the sun and his garments became light, was not a magic trick. It was the activation of the Akh, the final light body, a metamorphosis hidden in plain sight. The 7 bodies of man are not only parallel to the chakras, though that comparison helps in modern understanding. They are fields of perception, stations of self-awareness. The lower bodies bind us to time, emotion, instinct. The higher ones dissolve those boundaries, revealing that you were never confined to your form, your name, your thoughts. You are an aperture through which the universe observes itself. And Jesus was showing us how to widen that aperture. Egypt was mapping it in stone. The mystics across ages were encoding it into parables, paintings, mantras, and myths. But why was this connection erased? Because to know that you are a multidimensional being, capable of divine perception, immune to death, is the greatest threat to any system built on fear. It makes temples redundant. It decentralizes spiritual power. It frees the human soul from needing intermediaries. Those who remembered this inner technology, Gnostic Christians, Hermetic initiates, Sufi poets, were often silenced, burned, or exiled. The heresies were not moral errors. They were truths too luminous to be allowed in systems built on control. The cross and the Ankh share more than symbolic resemblance. One represents death and resurrection. The other, life and eternal breath. Together, they describe the central alchemy of the human soul: to die before dying, to awaken within the illusion, to remember that the body is not a prison, but a chrysalis. The teachings of Jesus were not meant to be worshipped. They were meant to be embodied. The same is true for the Egyptian initiations, not performances for the elite, but transformative processes designed to awaken the sevenfold human. This core concept, that man is a layered being on a journey of ascension, is what unites the ancient with the eternal. That the Christ within is not a metaphor. It is the seed light buried in the soil of your being. Egypt gave it names. Jesus gave it voice. Both encoded a path. And though empires rose to bury that path, it remains alive in the blueprint of your very breath. The illusion of separation between Egypt and Jerusalem, between body and spirit, between past and future, is maintained only so long as one forgets their inner composition. But once you begin to sense your 7 bodies, you can no longer see the world as flat. You begin to feel reality pulsing with geometry, memory, and mirrors. You begin to awaken. There are truths that cannot be taught, only remembered, reawakened by symbols that bypass logic and strike the inner tuning fork of the soul. Throughout time, sacred stories have served as carriers for this remembrance. In the mythic, in the allegorical, in the metaphoric folds of ancient parables, the true architecture of the human spirit was hidden, not to be lost, but to be preserved from those who would misuse it. And so, the language of the soul became myth. Egypt spoke in glyphs and gods. Jesus spoke in parables and paradoxes. But behind both was a singular intent: to light the way inward, to resurrect the inner cosmos. Consider the Osirian myth, not as dead religion, but as encoded blueprint. Osiris, the god of regeneration, is betrayed and torn into 14 pieces by his brother Set, the archetype of fragmentation, ego, and chaos. Isis, the divine feminine, finds 13 of the pieces, reassembles his body, and breathes life back into him. The 14th, his phallus, symbol of divine creative power, is never found, for it is no longer physical. It is now etheric, transcendent. Osiris is resurrected not in the realm of the dead, but in the celestial dimensions, becoming Lord of the Duat, the inner world. Now, Turn the lens to Jesus. He too is betrayed by one of his own. He too is symbolically torn, tortured, crucified, his physical self broken upon the cross. But on the third day, he rises, not as the same man, but transfigured. He tells Mary not to touch him, for he has not yet ascended to the Father. The body she knew is no longer the same. He has become light. What is being told here is not merely the story of sacrifice. It is the allegory of ascension. The Osirian and Christ narratives are two expressions of the same pattern: death of the fragmented self, reassembly through divine memory, and resurrection into the higher light body. This symbolic death is essential. It is the dissolution of the lower egoic shells, the false bodies we wear, the body of fear, the body of shame, the body of illusion. In Egyptian terms, it is the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at, not a punishment, but a measurement of lightness, of purity, of truth. If the heart is too heavy, burdened by unintegrated pain, it cannot ascend. Jesus said the pure in heart would see God, the same truth refracted differently. Another symbol, often overlooked, is the journey of Moses. He is raised in the palace of Egypt, initiated into its mysteries, before he is cast out into the wilderness. There, in solitude, he encounters the burning bush, a plant on fire, yet not consumed. Fire is the ancient symbol of spirit, of divine activation. The bush, like the spinal tree of the human body, burns with the energy of awakening. The voice that speaks from the fire does not identify as an external being, but declares, "I am that I am." Not a name, but a vibrational truth. The eternal witness within. The same I am that Jesus later affirms when he says, "Before Abraham was, I am." A direct transmission of eternal consciousness, echoing across the desert of time. Even the Egyptian temples, when understood symbolically, mirror the 7 bodies of man. To enter a temple was not merely an act of worship, it was a symbolic initiation into one's own spiritual anatomy. From the outer courtyard, the physical realm, through the hypostyle halls, the emotional and mental layers, into the inner sanctum, the causal and spiritual self, and finally, the Holy of Holies, where the divine essence, the Akh, resided. Jesus, too, taught in layers. He spoke plainly to the masses, but revealed deeper teachings to the disciples. He healed the physical, but his miracles always pointed to something greater. Your faith has made you whole. Not cured, whole, integrated, reunified. This is the thread. Every sacred story is not about external figures, but internal realities. Osiris is the fragmented soul. Isis is the intuitive power of remembrance. Set is the ego's sabotage. Jesus is the light within every human being, crucified daily by ignorance, resurrected whenever truth is remembered. The 7 bodies of man are not inventions of modern spirituality. They are the missing key, the unspoken glue between myth and mysticism. Even modern science, when stripped of materialist dogma, hints at these layers. The body emits electromagnetic fields. The heart, the brain, even the DNA vibrate, radiate, and respond. There are unseen energies that move through and around us. The ancients mapped these as bodies, because they understood that consciousness occupies space, not just physical space, but vibrational space. These narratives serve not to entertain, but to awaken the sleeping dimensions of self. You are not meant to read them as history. You are meant to remember yourself through them. And that is why they were hidden. Because once you see yourself in Osiris, in Jesus, in Horus and the Ankh, in the burning bush and the light body transfiguration, once you see the mirror, you cannot return to sleep. You begin to recognize the myths not as distant tales, but as living architecture. And the 7 bodies? They are the stairway to that recognition. Each step, a shedding. Each level, a deeper resurrection. To hold a cosmic truth is one thing. To live it, moment to moment, is another entirely. It is tempting to leave teachings like these suspended in the ether, marveling at their mystery, speaking of light bodies and resurrection as though they are reserved for saints and sages of another age. But that temptation is the last trick of the ego, to turn revelation into abstraction. The truth is this: your 7 bodies are not hidden in temples or scrolls. They are active now, in the micro-rituals of your every breath, thought, emotion, and movement. The mystery was never meant to be mystical in the sense of inaccessible. It was meant to be embodied, practical, lived. And it begins, not with perfection, but with perception. What happens when you begin to see the layers of yourself not as metaphors, but as real? Suddenly, a bad mood isn't just a passing fog, it's a ripple in the emotional body. A racing thought isn't just stress, it's an imbalance in the mental sheath. An inexplicable fatigue might not be about sleep at all, but a depletion of your etheric energy field. You begin to witness yourself as a multidimensional field of being. This witnessing is the ignition point of remembrance. It is how the resurrection begins, not in a tomb, but in awareness. Every action then becomes part of your initiation. The food you eat doesn't just feed your physical body, it alters your energetic field. The way you speak to yourself is not just psychology, it reprograms your emotional and mental bodies. Even how you sit, how you breathe, how you listen, sends ripples through your subtle layers. The Egyptian initiates knew this. That's why temples required silence. Why initiation demanded fasting, contemplation, the purification of intention. It wasn't moralism, it was energetic hygiene. Jesus mirrored this. His 40 days in the desert were not a punishment. They were purification, stripping away the noise of the lower bodies, confronting temptation, not as sin, but as fragmentation, the urge to feed the body, to assert power, to manipulate appearances. These are the same temptations we face in modern life, only now they wear new masks: consumerism, status, distraction. And every time you resist feeding those illusions, you realign with your higher bodies. Every time you remember the stillness inside you, even for one breath, you are stepping into resurrection. This is why breath is sacred, not just as a function of life, but as a bridge between worlds. The Egyptians encoded breath work in their silent rituals. Jesus breathed on his disciples and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." This was not symbolic. It was energetic transmission, the activation of the higher bodies through intentional breath and awareness. The 7 bodies respond to breath like strings respond to tuning. A deep, conscious inhale is a signal. I am present. A full exhale is a release. I surrender. And over time, the breath itself becomes your guide. When you're aligned, it is smooth, expansive. When you're off course, it tightens, shortens. Your body becomes the compass of your soul. And what of love? Not romantic sentiment, but the frequency of unity. True love, unconditional, radiant, is the natural state of the highest bodies. It's not something to strive for. It's something to uncover beneath the layers of trauma, defense, and story. The heart, when unburdened, becomes the gateway to the causal and spiritual bodies. Jesus lived from this space. His compassion was not weakness, it was multidimensional perception. He could see the pain behind actions, the soul behind sin, the divine blueprint beneath every distortion. And he called it forth. That is not mythology. That is your birthright. To live as a being with 7 bodies is not to withdraw from the world, but to re-enter it with clarity. You still shop for groceries, answer emails, raise children, pay bills, but you do so with the awareness that each interaction is charged with energetic consequence. You recognize patterns not as flaws, but as data from your inner architecture. You become your own priest, your own healer, your own temple. There is no guru here, no distant teacher to bow before. Jesus and the Egyptian masters pointed the way, yes, but the journey itself must unfold within your own skin. The spiritual path is not a ladder upward, it is a spiral inward. The deeper you go, the wider your perception, and with it, your compassion, your stillness, your creative power. To integrate this is not to adopt a new belief, but to surrender the false ones. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are not separate from the divine. You are simply misaligned, temporarily forgotten. And even in forgetting, your bodies continue to hum with memory, waiting for you to tune to them once again. The practical implications ripple outward. Clearer decision-making, deeper relationships, emotional regulation, not from suppression, but from awareness. A renewed connection to nature, to silence, to synchronicity. You become less reactive, more responsive, less bound by fear, more attuned to trust. This is not fantasy. This is physics of the soul. And perhaps most powerfully, your fear of death dissolves. For you begin to understand that death is not an end. It is merely the shedding of one layer. The innermost light moves on, intact, unshaken, unlost. This is what Jesus demonstrated, what Osiris embodied, what you too are encoded to remember. We began this journey as if peeling back the layers of time, brushing dust off ancient truths half buried in the sands of myth and the margins of Scripture. And yet, as we stand at the end of this spiral path, we realize none of this was ever about Egypt, or Jesus, or the 7 bodies as exotic spiritual theories to be admired from a distance. It was always about you. Not the name you answer to, not the body you wear like clothing, but the eternal flicker of light behind your eyes. The original I am before language, before memory, before time carved its first groove. Everything you have ever searched for is already within you. The temples of Egypt were not built to impress the gods. They were blueprints for inner architecture. Jesus did not come to start a religion. He came to remind you that the kingdom is not found in stone or law, but in the stillness behind your breath. The 7 bodies are not spiritual accessories. They are the multidimensional mirror through which the infinite knows itself as you. And yet, this knowledge was not just forgotten. It was buried, layered under millennia of doctrine, distraction, and denial. You were told you were fallen, flawed, mortal, a sinner, a mistake. But the truth, unchanged by time, untouched by dogma, remains this: you are light, descending into density to remember itself through the game of forgetting. This is the true resurrection. Not a distant miracle to be revered, but a daily choice to return, to awareness, to presence, to wholeness. You don't wait for it. You become it. You embody it. When you feel the pressure of modern life, the noise of systems built on fear and separation, remember, you are not trapped in the machine. You are the one who stepped inside to awaken the others. Every irritation, every grief, every desire is a messenger. And when seen through the lens of your 7 bodies, they become instructions, initiations. Emotional pain, an imbalance in the astral field, persistent confusion, a distortion in the mental body, chronic fatigue, a leak in the etheric sheath. These are not curses. They are maps. And with every breath of conscious presence, you step closer to your own remembering. We must not wait for institutions to validate these truths. They are not theirs to give. You carry the ankh in your spine. You wear the cross in your nervous system. You are the temple and the priest and the God within. And once you realize this, truly, deeply realize it, not just in your mind, but in your bones, the game of suffering begins to unravel, slowly, like night giving way to dawn. Now is not the time for passive awakening. The world cries out not for more information, but for embodiment. The question is no longer, what do I believe? But, what am I becoming? And the answer lives not in words, but in your vibration, your walk, your gaze. The forgotten connection between Jesus, Egypt, and the 7 bodies of man was never truly lost. It was hidden within you, waiting for the right moment. Perhaps that moment is now. Perhaps this is the very lifetime where you stop searching and start integrating, where you stop waiting for someone to save you, and instead awaken the God seed sleeping behind your ribs. You are not the dust of the earth. You are the light before dust ever knew form. So take this remembering into your body. Speak it into your breath. Walk it into your days. And when the world tries to pull you back into forgetting, through fear, through noise, through illusion, place your hand on your chest. Feel the rhythm of the eternal within, and whisper to yourself, I am not becoming divine. I am remembering that I always was. And that is the resurrection they could never erase.